actually you have discovered, you and your team have discovered the brain circuits that do FOMO.
Largely driven by social media, it's the fear of missing out. It's the anxiety induced by feeling that you're not part of a rewarding experience that others are having. And so it's kind of, a very pervasive form of social exclusion that can be experienced when using social media. So we wanted to look at this. What is FOMO? What does it do to our brain? Is social pain related to physical pain?
Is it?
And the answer is yes.
Welcome to Beyond Lab Walls, a podcast from the Salk Institute, a nonprofit foundational research institute bound by collaboration and curiosity, where scientists come together to ask, what if? The Salk Institute stands as a landmark monument to science overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Within the iconic Louis Kahn-designed architecture, scientists tackle global questions in aging, agriculture, disease, nutrition, sleep, memory, and so much more. Here at Salk, we're unlocking the secrets of life itself and sharing them beyond lab walls.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this special episode of Beyond Lab Walls. This is a podcast series from the Salk Institute, and I'm Gerald Joyce. I'm the president of the Salk Institute. I'll be your host today. This is a kind of special part of the series where we've been having a set of conversations about brain health. We declared 2026 Salk's Year of Brain Health, of cognitive brain health, and we're focusing on trying to understand the ways in which we can support cognitive brain health through a long lifespan. We live a long time, most of us, hopefully, and we want to maintain good health, and in particular, we want to maintain good brain health. So through these various podcasts, we've been talking about all the ways in which our bodies can support our brain with regard to brain health. We've talked about cardiovascular health, about metabolic health, about immune health. We're going to talk today about social health and how that's such an important component of brain health through our lifespan. So, we've talked about diet and how diet is so important, and exercise and the types of exercise one needs to support good brain health. We've talked about sleep and having good sleep cycles. But today we're really going to focus on diverse mental stimulation and socialization in particular. So I am very fortunate to have with me today to introduce to you Salk neuroscientist Kay Tye. Kay is an absolute world leader in understanding the brain circuits that underlie socialization, how we become a social animal, and how that then relates to cognitive brain health over our lifespan. So we're going to talk about social health and the importance of socialization, and in particular the way in which that relates to brain health and to a good cognitive state over our lifespan. So let's start by welcoming Kay. Thank you, Kay, for being with us today. Tell us what do we mean by social health? That's I'm not sure that's a term everyone's heard.
Social health, I feel like it's been around for a while in terms of thinking about when I was little. I grew up on the health triangle: social, physical, mental health. And it's important to note that the brain is really important for all parts of those triangle: physical, mental, and social. Okay. And I think only recently have we understood what social health means and what the impacts of social health are on the rest of our health. And I think that's why it's been such a hot topic lately.
So can you give us just a simple definition of social health? What is that?
Social health means that you are having your needs met in terms of the quality and quantity of social connections.
Quality and quantity.
So it's, I think the severe cases of where you have low quantity, if you're totally isolated, almost all social species would find solitude or solitary confinement unpleasant.
Right.
And if you think about it in terms of quality, almost every social individual would not want to be bullied or excluded from a group.
Okay.
So,
I think when we think about social health, we think about as kids get towards being social for the first time in adolescence and getting through puberty. But we want to talk today about social health as we age. Why is social health important, after we've already been socialized and been an adult, as we age?
So honestly, social health is a huge part of maintaining cognitive function and brain health throughout healthy aging. And I think, you can see it in the data. Almost every social species, from flies to mice to monkeys to humans, dogs, if you isolate animals, their lifespan drops precipitously. And there's all sorts of negative health consequences that comes along with being socially isolated. Even just perceived loneliness is associated with, of course, more mental health disorders like mood disorders, anxiety, depression, but also physical health problems like cardiac disease or cancer, having worse.
All of this comes from not having good social health.
It's correlated with.
I see, correlated.
It's correlated with a lack of social contact, and so this is something we're really interested in. And it's subjective. It's just perceived loneliness. It doesn't necessarily. It's not the same thing as just how much contact you're getting. It's how you perceive it. If you can feel lonely at a party, or you can feel fine alone in your room.
And I get the sense this is not just like one rainy afternoon where you're kind of alone. This is more of a chronic under-socialization, both quantity and quality.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the acute and chronic points, because that's been a really big confusion point in the field, because there are certain consequences of being socially isolated for a short amount of time. If you go away to go to work, come back home, it's welcome home, great to see you. But if you're isolated for a long period of time, sometimes it's it's get off my lawn, please stay away. And so what we're really interested in is, what are the brain changes that precipitate this transition from welcome home to get off my lawn.
So if I take a long walk in the woods, that's not going to affect my brain. But if I'm in this chronic kind of under-socialized state, what actually happens to the brain if you...
So it's a great question. This is sort of our conceptual framework of social homeostasis. So in any homeostatic system, you need to be able to detect...
Social homeostasis, so that means balanced social state, is that what...
So homeostasis comes from the Greek words for same and steady.
Same and steady.
It means, it's a term developed by Walter Cannon to describe the conditions that optimize survival for a given organism.
Okay.
And so social homeostasis is just this idea that we have to regulate the quality and quantity of social connections. We need a system that allows us to detect how much social contact we're getting, how the quality and quantity of what we're getting.
Okay.
We feed that information forward to a control center that stores some set point that's like the optimum. And if
so you can actually get too much socialization.
For sure. There's definitely stress from overcrowding. If you feel like there's too much competition, those are forces that can make you feel like you would like less density.
Is the just right, the homeostasis contact. Set point the same for everybody, or is everyone's kind of different?
I think everyone's different. And sometimes people ask me, what's the difference between social homeostasis set point and being an extrovert or an introvert? And I would say those ideas are related, but introvert and extrovert, the way that those terms have been used is more of a trait, something that is a constant feature of this individual. Whereas I would argue that social homeostasis is actually, it's something that can be dynamic, and actually one thing that, maybe allostasis is another term that's come up.
Allostasis.
I should have said that.
What does that mean?
Allostasis means anticipating change and having change to meet an anticipated challenge. So you can talk about how it is, but basically the idea is that if you are under your preferred level of social homeostasis, then you might feel lonely. I'll call my friends. I'm in a deficit, and
you try to compensate.
I'm exerting effort. My control center computed that there's a deficit. I feed that forward to an effector system, which just means like whatever drives my behaviors or functions to meet this need. So call our friends, invite people over to the house, whatever, that's what a mouse might make vocalizations. A human might, my daughter's going to text her friends.
Say, let's go out. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
and then that's actually like changing things in your brain when you're
exerting correction effort. And I wouldn't say that's changing things in your brain. It's just activating systems that are already present. But if you have correction effort that's constantly burning, you're always calling your friends and they never come over, And, you're always...
Oh, that's the quality part, not the quantity. You're trying too hard and it's
the effort without a return, I suppose, without reinforcement could result in eventually, what we see in behaviors is it seems almost like a step function drop off. You one day stop calling that friend. You one day stop leaving the house. It's like, it's just the mouse, what might not leave its burrow that particular day, or, whatever the venture of possible social reward is not worth.
So what I'm hearing is
the correction effort.
So socialization is itself a social activity. You can't just declare, I want more socialization to get to my set point. It's a partnership with others. So what I'm hearing from this is, so caregivers and family can really help support the brain health of others in their family and friends by responding to this call for socialization.
Exactly. If anyone's reaching out and burning that correction effort, we want to try to meet them where they are. But what we found is that if for a long time you're feeling that you're at a deficit and putting all this effort out with nothing in return, you kind of snap, and then you adapt your social homeostatic set point to your new normal.
Oh, and then which is a non-healthy point then, huh?
I would say it depends on
how far down it tracks.
Well, I'll say that it does correlate with lifespan.
Well,
so
yeah.
But after you've adapted to this new normal, if you were reintroduced to your previous social group, whatever your previous normal was, it's going to feel like too much. And so some people might have experienced this if they quarantined for the pandemic and it's the first time that they went into an auditorium and it was full, or, just the first time I was touching strangers out in the world after the pandemic. It was
without
definitely
a mask.
An adjustment.
Yes.
And so I think that's something that we've been studying, this phenomenon.
Well, and I know you actually study, there are specific brain circuits where this is happening. So without getting too technical about, all the scientific names, but is that right? There's places in your brain that are these circuits that are registering this sort of homeostatic, just right.
That's right. We have different parts of our brain for recognizing what we're getting, remembering what we're expecting, and calculating the difference and trying to change it. And so those are all circuits within the individual brain that help the individual know their place in a group, and be able to adjust to whatever their needs are. It's always a question of when in a colony will the animal split off? At what point does, the colony become its own country or its own, when do groups split off from other groups, and when do you break off into cliques? And it's sort of an interesting balance of how sticky a group is versus how strong the pressures are to remove yourself from the group.
And there's circuits in the brain that are sort of modulating this.
I mean, it's interesting. There's circuits within the brain that modulate this. It is dynamic. We can adapt very rapidly to a changing social environment. And even across evolution, the appearance of the ability to be social has seemingly appeared and disappeared de novo. There's not a clear...
has evolved independently multiple times.
Yes.
Are humans the most social thing going? Or are there animals that are as social as we are?
I suppose...
Like honeybees are pretty social, but in a weirdly different kind of way. But.
Yeah. Well, that's a great example. I would say probably humans are the most social, but we have some advantages that may not be the capacity of our brain, but other aspects. So in terms of how complex your social group can be, there's two ways to think about it. You can think about it from an organizational dimension, like what you're talking about with honeybees.
Yeah.
Super organized, thousands of bees. They all know their job. Everyone knows their place and order. But there's another type of social complexity that's relational. And so that's more like, yes, there's giant companies with thousands and thousands of people, and not everybody knows each other, but lots of people do know each other. Lots of people do have personal relationships, and it makes it richer than just a little pyramid.
And I guess then you get more into the emotional part of social, which, no offense to the honeybees and the ants, but I don't think of them as being real emotional. They're more like soldiers.
Yeah, I mean, I think you would have high quality and low quality social relationships in both an organizational structure as well as in a relational model. But I do think that a lot of the benefits to our brain are on a relational level.
Okay. So now as we get older, we think of the fragility, as I say, of teenagers, they're very socially still forming. But is it true that as we get older, the getting this right, getting this socialization set point right is more important for maintaining cognitive brain health in particular? Is that true? And if so, why is that the case? That we have a kind of fragility as we get older, or is it just the circumstance of getting older that our social circles tend to narrow?
Well, it's hard to say what's more important, socializing a young child who has decades of life ahead of them, or, in an older adult. But I would say the need to focus on it may be greater later in life because
of the risk of cognitive decline.
Of the reality, the risk of cognitive decline, and the reality that much of your social ties are not living anymore. If you are fortunate enough to have a very long life, you're going to see some of your social network pass away. Yeah. And so I think that's something that the inevitable shrinking of your social network as you age, that's just inevitable, as well as, if you have limited ability, limited capacity to be independent, then it really drops off very suddenly. And I think if you're not able to mobility is very related to the richness of your social life. You can be part of so many different groups if you can get yourself around. But if you have to wait for others to take care of you, that can, in practice, really limit your social environment. And that can be a very rapid change for a lot of older adults. And so oftentimes, there's a precipitous drop in cognitive decline. And it's related to not having, varied stimulation. And what's more stimulating than talking to someone who has their own ideas and can help you remember things and make jokes and play. There's so many things that a social agent can offer you. And also there's the greater responsibility that you have to keep everything, you have to recall everything about this person and be considerate. And those are things that really keep you active. And
I think we're really getting to the bullseye of what this series is about. So, I mean, the sad fact is that, by age 70, 1 in 3 people have cognitive decline of some sort. Mm-hmm. By age 90, it's 1 in 6 by age 70 and 1 in 3 by age 90. Mm-hmm. But what this series is all about, and what the focus this year of Salk's Year of Brain Health is, what can we do about it? Okay, so I think you pointed out the challenge of maintaining good socialization and social health as we get older, just because of circumstances. But what's your advice? What can people do? And I think what can people and their friends and family do to keep that social health healthy?
And I would say, it's like such a cheesy analogy, but I'll make the analogy
I'll take cheese. It's okay.
to how you would keep physical health. You want to keep mobility. You want to keep range of motion. Okay. You want to stretch yourself. And so I think with social health, I would say you want to have a lot of different types of social interactions. Some of them being quality, deep, heart-to-heart, one-on-one conversations. Some of them being in a group. Some of, just having more different types of experiences is going to keep you more agile and less brittle in terms of what your bands of tolerance, what's going to make you overwhelmed or snap, You don't want to be overwhelmed or snap. Those are not things that you would want in your body. You don't want them for your brain.
So it can be small things, just playing cards or
just having, you would just want to make it as different as possible.
Different.
But
I think people like routine though. It's like, oh, this is my book club and we meet every Thursday. Is that okay?
And I think routine is actually how you build really deep quality relationships. But, in a given day, at this point, knowing everything I know about the brain and neuroscience, I think about, I want to have some alone time. I want to have some time with my kids, some time with my colleagues, sometimes with my students, discussing project ideas, sometimes in a group, sometimes I'm going to be giving a seminar to an auditorium full of people, and sometimes I'm talking to my partner, whatever it is, I don't want to limit myself by only having a one-dimensional social experience, because
That's very good advice.
That's just limiting the range of what you can do with your brain.
So shake it up a bit, but as we get older, as you said, less mobility. And that could be for physical reasons, for other health reasons. What about people that really are quite restricted in what they can do? Can you do it by Zoom? Does that count? Rather than go out somewhere, but suppose someone's a shut in because of health constraints. How do they keep social health?
I think that's a great point, and I would say, in terms of things that are remote, Zoom or phone calls, I would predict, are going to be much better.
Is texting okay, or that's not enough?
Okay, so basically, I think social connections are high quality when you have interbrain synchrony and alignment.
Interbrain synchrony, what does that mean?
Interbrain synchrony. So it just means that we're having shared brain dynamics. We're on the same page. We're on the same wavelength.
Okay.
When you look someone across the room and you click, and you get it. Whatever the things is, you understand something. I don't know what it is.
So you get more from the body language and the physical.
Yeah, I mean, it can be anything. It could be, of course, like taking a walk on the beach, or watching a movie together, or watching live music together, or having a conversation on the phone is better than, I think in person is always better, because you get to use all your sensory modalities, which you've evolved to use in an integrative way. But Zoom or a phone call, at least you have the opportunity for brain synchrony.
If they're connecting like eye to eye.
You say something,
you
make a joke, I'm gonna laugh, you feel funny. It's like that type of experience. It's hard to do it asynchronously, like on social media or text messaging, maybe if you're like really both texting actively, but that is by design an asynchronous form of communication.
Yeah, so we have this massive thing called social media, which has engulfed the world. Is that really social, or is that just media?
I mean, it is something, but I would say that it's high quantity, low quality.
There we go.
Right.
Okay.
It's what do we really get from social media? You see what other people are doing, generally without you. And I think that's actually created a phenomenon that we've really endeavored to study in the lab.
You in your research, I know you talk about FOMO, fear of missing out. But actually, you have discovered, you and your team have discovered the brain circuits that do FOMO. So if you become too addicted to social media, especially these pages where people do all these incredible and perfect things, and you're on the outside looking in, that's not social health.
Well, FOMO, just to make sure we're all on the same page.
Yeah, tell us what FOMO is, neuroscience speak.
Sort of slang for a phenomenon where, largely driven by social media, it's the fear of missing out. It's the anxiety induced by feeling that you're not part of a rewarding experience that others are having. And so it's kind of, a very pervasive form of social exclusion that can be experienced when using social media. That's not to say that's the only thing people experience when they use social media. Lots of different things can be experienced. But that is one phenomenon that has emerged. And so we wanted to look at this and sort of study in animals what is FOMO? What does it do to our brain? Is social pain related to physical pain? And
is it?
And the answer is yes.
So it hurts to experience FOMO.
I mean, okay, there's a lot of things. I was very suspicious about this question when I first started. I'll tell you, 6 years ago, I did not really believe this. I'm like, yeah, mommy kisses the boo-boo, whatever. But there's something to the phenomenon, actually. And, I guess I would have thought it was all social constructs created by humans. But actually, we found that after a social exclusion experience compared to...
This is with mice.
This is with mice.
So what are they missing out on, the
So
mice?
basically, there's animals that live together, and then one of the animals that normally is cage mates with the other mice will be separated, and the other 3 mice will get a chocolate milkshake party where they circle around and have a chocolate milkshake.
And
then
the one
mouse
who's
is
left
excluded.
out has to watch them get the chocolate milkshake?
Yes, and the mouse that is excluded...
Aww.
After the social pain experience,
yes,
will be more sensitive, because the other control groups we used were milkshakes being delivered to an empty chamber, or one mouse can get it, but it's not a group of mice.
Oh, so it's not FOMO if you just see one person get a goodie? It's got to be like you're not in the group?
There's a
but social
stronger
media is all
effect.
about the group, right? So
The effect was strongest with the group. And so we wanted to know, is this because of just feeling socially excluded?
Yeah.
Or is this that more other animals being interested in it makes it feel like this thing is more valuable? If everyone else is on social media, does that make me feel like the social media is more valuable? If everyone
as long
else
as you're part of the
has
gang.
the iPhone 17, does that make me feel like I need the iPhone 17 more?
Okay. So
And the answer is yes.
Okay. So here's
Having
another
more.
case where people can help each other, because what the group should do is help the person not feel like they're FOMO, but welcome them to the group, right? So we can help each other's cognitive brain health, not just by ourselves looking to get that stimulation and socialization, but like welcoming others into it. Is that fair to say?
I mean, okay, look, if like some famous influencers wanted to invite me to their party, I guess I would be like, I'll think about it. But like, that's not really the choice,
That's
right?
not- okay.
Exclusion is inevitable. And I don't think that I'm not going to try to, I mean, my first strategy to solve this problem would not be to control what everyone puts on social media.
Well, I'm kind of
know?
going beyond social media, just being nice to your colleagues, and friends and neighbors, and not like, elbowing someone away,
Yes.
just the humanity, I guess. So, okay, we talked about social media probably more than I thought we were going to, but, the new trend, of course, is AI. And now you're having all these social interactions with bots, that could be quite empathetic. And maybe there's a whole little army of them that you're talking with. Is that socialization? Is that social health when you're, working with an AI?
It's a really interesting question. I think the data aren't out yet because the technology are developing so quickly. But AI, artificial intelligence, is truly approaching what I would deem to be intelligence, because having an understanding of emotional processing and social dynamics is that next level that we've never been able to achieve before. And I think that's really been a huge
But it misses the physical
breakthrough.
part. There isn't the, like you were saying, that, the sort of body language and the more chummy relatedness. I mean, does it have to get all the way to AI embodied robots that smile and, open their eyes wide when you talk? Or is it, I guess it'll eventually get to that. We're going to have, AI pseudo humans.
I mean, I think it's like I was saying before about how much you get from a phone call or a Zoom call, that it's worth a lot. And I think having that level of contact from AI agents is sort of the new frontier. So we'll see what the impacts are on health.
Yeah. So this is great. We learned a lot about social health and how that feeds to brain health and avoiding the risk of cognitive decline. Throughout this series, we've talked about all these other aspects. How does this connect? So how does social health connect to the physical health, right? The cardiovascular, metabolic, immune health, all these systems of the body, and the system of our social brain. Do they cross reinforce, or how do they connect?
Yeah, no, it's a really great question. And I think you're basically asking one of the most fundamental questions of mechanism orchestration. I have lots of homeostatic needs. I might be thirsty and hungry and cold and tired and lonely, all these things. And how do I decide what to do? Yes. How do I decide which need to meet first? What's the relative level of urgency? But it's really interesting because when we first started studying these circuits, we wanted to make sure that they're relevant in humans. And so we did some experiments on neurotypical humans, or MIT undergraduates. And
MIT undergraduates are neurotypical.
To the degree that you agree with that statement, and looked at how much these dorsal raphe nucleus dopamine neurons.
Okay, we all hear about dopamine because that's the sort of reward circuit.
And that's what a lot of people think about dopamine, but
okay.
Dopamine is definitely more complicated than reward juice.
Reward juice, okay.
Cringes. But there's multiple dopamine systems, and one dopamine system that you might have heard a lot about is coming from a midbrain region called the ventral tegmental area. That's important for reward. But there's other dopamine neurons that are in the dorsal raphe nucleus. kind of next to all the serotonin neurons.
But wait, these all talk to each other, all these different circuits?
Yeah, there's a lot of interconnectivity.
But they all then feed to cognitive brain health in some way through socialization, or?
Well, I was going to say that in MIT undergrads, we found that there's a similar brain region, the dorsal raphe nucleus, that is active when they've been socially isolated and exposed to social stimuli.
So that's a deficit center.
And as well as when they've been food deprived and then are shown food cues.
So there's a physiological connection between being starved for socialization and being starved for food. Wow. So
there's a similar system for feeling those empty needs.
But as I think you were alluding to, you still need kind of all systems go in order to be, in a mood to socialize, right? You can't be like starving or dying of thirst or, cardiovascularly like crumpled. You've got to have, the green lights have to mostly be on.
Well, I think it's really interesting. There's some recent studies that have shown that individuals will prefer familiar social agents when they're sick, as opposed to novel ones.
I know that feeling. Yeah, when you have the flu, you just want familiar foods and not much of them. And
you don't want to go on you don't want to go to a party attention. Of strangers. You want your mommy. So I think that's those are different social needs, but they're both social needs.
Good advice. Okay, so last question for you. Let's throughout this series we've emphasized the fact that when we ask these questions at Salk about all these different contributors to cognitive brain health, we try to go beyond like just the slogans, like, yeah, you should exercise, yeah, you should have good diet. We try to understand, the mechanism behind why doing these good things contributes to cognitive brain health. And you've given great examples with understanding mechanistically what's going on in socialization and how that makes us healthy. So the question is, okay, what's coming next out of your lab? You don't want to like scoop yourself here, but like what big question are you guys asking right now? What's coming next?
So I think there's a few different questions, and I want to come back to what you said about recommendations, because, of everything we've learned, what I would say overall is just to try to expand your bands of tolerance. And that's going to make you have more cognitive resilience. And I think that goes especially for social, environmental things, but also anything cognitive. So it's like if you always take the same route home from work to home, then if that road is blocked, you don't know how to get home. But if you take lots of different routes, then if one road is blocked, you have a lot of other ways. And I think that's something that gets at cognitive resilience that you can carry with you in aging.
Cognitive resilience, that's a really great phrase. So, and you mean it both literally, take a different road home, and figuratively, that like look for different ways to get from A to B in
different circuits in your brain can accomplish the same functions. Yeah. There's a lot of redundancy in our brain, and we just need to use it. And I think
this is something you're studying in your lab, how to find multiple ways through the path.
So I guess the new direction I'm really excited about in the lab is this concept of active individuation. Why do we have individual variability? It's something that is, we're all unique, but yet for clinical trials and lots of, health treatments that require clinical trials, individual variability can be a challenge to understand. And I think one of the things that we're really interested in individual variability, of course, we know that genetics and environment are things that produce individual variability. But actually, we're finding very surprisingly that when we do experiments on genetically inbred animals and in identical environments, that we get a lot of individual variability. We want to know what that comes from.
You mean this behavioral variability? So they just do things differently?
Yes. So the idea that having a social rank, and then if someone's the alpha and someone's the omega, you have different roles. And if you're in nature and you're just by yourself, you're gonna do all the things that need to be done. You're gonna chop the wood and make the fire and boil the water and get the food. But if you have two people, one of you's the hunter and one of you's the gatherer, immediately there's specialization. If there's cooperation, there's going to be specialization. And I believe that active desire to cooperate is also motivating and incentivizing individuation because we have this need to specialize.
Wow, it's a complex thought here, because it's both good and bad that, if you just become one piece on an assembly line, you're not going to get diverse kind of stimulation, which doesn't sound good. But if you're part of a team that cooperates in complex ways, then you get that kind of stimulation. So it's finding that right balance. Very good. We look forward to seeing what comes next from your lab. Kay, thank you for spending time with us today. This is a part I think people think more about, like just the physical things they can do to support their brain health. And those are all important. Exercise is top of my list. Diet's super important. But there's also these behavioral things that are choices, choices we make on joining a book club or, calling someone up and saying what's new, that actually support our brain health through our long lifespan. So thanks so much. So there you have it, another episode in our series on Salk's Year of Brain Health. I hope you've seen some of the other podcasts that have been in this series. There's more to come. We have more to touch on, but I think today we really honed in on the fact that social health, diverse mental stimulation, and different ways of doing socialization, I guess up to and including what happens with AI, does contribute to our brain health. And these are behaviors that we want to start early in life, and especially as we could become more limited sometimes in our social circles or our physical capabilities, that we need to work harder to maintain these kind of behaviors later in life. So thanks again for joining us. If you would like to learn more and would like to contribute to Salk's initiative on Year of Brain Health, please go to salk.edu/brain health. Thank you so much for listening.
Beyond Lab Walls is a production of the Salk Office of Communications. Subscribe to this podcast to hear more exciting Salk science stories. Our monthly newsletter and seasonal magazine, Inside Salk, can also bring the lab to you, spotlighting our staff and scientists and the discoveries that are only possible at Salk. Visit salk.edu to learn more about the world within these walls.